Thanks, Rick. Well, we have Dave back with us today for the long-awaited completion of the 3 seminar series. So, Dave, a little bit differently we have this semester. We have some participants online. Galena and Cami are here. So be sure to include them if you can in the discussions. And we'll turn the time over to Dave. Thank you.
I have to put in a plug for Russ as well. We were students together here in the program. And Russ is awesome. You'll enjoy that if you take advantage of that opportunity. So the topic today is visualizations and analytics. I'm going to take a slightly grumpy view in the beginning, but it'll be happier toward the end, I promise. So in terms of an overview, maybe I will put that. I want to start by looking at Google Analytics, which is kind of the canonical set of visualizations for analytics kind of data. Talk about assumptions there. Look at analytics in Blackboard and Canvas. Talk about the waterfall, which is a visualization that some of you may have seen. And then talk about 3 different projects I've been working on recently. One where we learned some painful lessons with the Virginia Community College system. One about telling data stories, and then finish up with interactive visualizations. And as always, please don't wait to the end. If there's something you'd like to hear more or less about, if you need me to move along, feel free to indicate. And with apologies to the, what's your name that said the prayer? Sorry, Scott. Yeah. Nobody but my mom calls me Dr. Wiley. Yeah. So if you have a question, just say, Dave. That'd be great. So Google Analytics first. Let's hop over and take a look at the kinds of visualizations that you get from Google Analytics. Now this is, several of you in this class worked on the project, or several of you here in the center worked on project management for instructional designers. This is the analytics from that, just as an example. So, here's the visualization. This little chart is showing kind of patterns of who's coming and how many people are coming, how often. Over the weeks, you can see it kind of troughs in the weekends and is higher during the middle of the week. Total number of sessions, total number of users, page views, average session length, new versus returning visitors, stuff like that. A lot of data, and certainly easier to take in this form than it would be if it were just presented as a big table of numbers. This is a really interesting visualization trying to help you understand the path that people take through the website. So these are the first pages that people landed on when they came to the site. And then from those pages, which page did they go to, and which page did they go to next? And after that, which page did they go to next? Which gives you this kind of view of, like I said, the pathways that people take as they move through. And you can see that at each point is kind of red down arrow showing you, here's the percentage of people that made it here that dropped out afterward. There's a lot of people who hit their very first page, their starting page, and then drop out. That's called the bounce rate. Number of people who look at one page and then keep going. But this is a super interesting visualization in terms of, again, think about if you're just looking at the raw data for which page, which IP address hit, and where it went to next. Having it laid out visually like this is interesting. Let's see if we can. Oh, am I not on the Wi-Fi? It thinks I am. Oh, hey David, we need your car keys.
Sorry, I'm sorry to hear
it. Fill it up. One more second. Said I was on, but it wasn't giving me any access.
Everybody logged off the network.
I haven't done it. Well, we'll let this keep doing its thing and move on. Here's a visualization of the geolocation data. Right, so these are the different people from around the world that are coming to look at the site, and Nope. Nobody from Greenland is coming. So darker colors means, a larger percentage of the traffic is from there. So right now it's US, India, UK, Canada, Malaysia, Australia is kind of the way that that's playing out. You can see India's darker. And so there's multiple kinds of data that are being presented here. It's not just which countries did visits come from, but how many visits came, and they're using color and shading of darkness of color to represent that. Here's what Google refers to as some engagement data, and this is purely about the number of seconds that the session lasted. How long were they on the site? So you can see a lot of people just come, they're there for between 0 and 10 seconds, and they bounce away again. But then there's a good chunk of people who are there somewhere between 1 and 30 minutes. Do we have network now? Resolving host. I don't think they do a particularly interesting job with this data here, just in a table. They haven't really visualized it at all. But here are the different browsers that people were using that came to the site, so this isn't particularly interesting from a visualization point of view.
Don't you get a pie chart?
You can, and there might be another one somewhere else.
It did.
I poked around a little further.
Is this our book we read?
What's that?
Is this our book?
This isn't our book, this is the book from the previous class.
Oh, okay.
This is Project Management for Instructional Design.
Ah, okay. It's like, man, we're looking at it.
And then this is showing again where people are coming from. But you can see these kind of design patterns over and over again. This, these kind of connected dots charts, these little bar plots, the pie charts. And in this case telling us, the overwhelming majority of people that come to the project management book come from Google. They come from organic search. A big chunk of them, 2,700 of them, came directly, just typed the address in their bar. Some were referred by others, referred through social.
What is social, like from Facebook?
So like if you click the link out of Facebook or out of Twitter or somewhere else. Yeah. But we've never run a social campaign to try to drive traffic to it. This would be more interesting if I could get on the network. It's too bad. This actually shows you live action, what's happening on the page right now, how many people are on the page, what they're doing in terms of their behavior. This would all be kind of scrolling past and in motion if our network were working. Sorry about that, guys.
Turn off the Wi-Fi and then turn it back on.
I did.
Oh.
Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens if we try plugging it. Hey, maybe. Maybe. Woohoo! What?
What the?
Yeah, it's crazy story.
Okay. No, not what we're talking about. All right, so here's the data. You can see this guy, kind of what's happening per second. You can see him sliding along a little bit there. This refreshes per minute. Here's the pages that there are 2 people actively looking at Chapter 8, Module 3 in the Project Management textbook right now.
Popular.
So, yeah.
One person
Probably.
is here.
Whoa, whoa.
Oh, there we go. And we can see
How many of those are in this room?
can see what how many of you are on pm4id.org right now?
I just
I
closed
want to
it.
see myself.
All right, looks
I
like
want to see myself. You won't see yourself.
Okay, I'm here, but nothing happened. Oh, there I am.
Oh.
All right. So, in terms of analytics, visualization, I think that's considered to be the state of the art. But as our good friend Dylan, if he were here, Dylan would be sitting in the back of the room, and right about now he would raise his hand and say, what would he say, Andy?
What do I do now?
No, he'd say, so what? So what? So I saw all these bars, I saw all these pie charts, I saw all these things, so great, what am I supposed to do? And the Google Analytics tools are really made They're really made for people who are running commerce sites to try to figure out how to get more people to buy while they're there. Well, get more people to buy when they do come to your website. And I think this is a common slip up that I think we're also guilty of in learning analytics is like Google says, oh, everybody understands shopping. You've been shopping your whole life. You know what shopping is about. If we provide you with some data about shopping, you'll be able to figure out how to take those data and use them in some way to make the shopping experience better. But it turns out that there's a small disconnect between a bunch of pie charts and bar graphs and maps that with different shades of blue and figuring out how to actually do better. I think the two assumptions that we want to make about analytics and particularly about visualizations, we want to assume that the analysis at its core is actually actionable in some way. There's some action that we could take after that analysis. That's the first assumption. And the second assumption is whatever we're providing in terms of a visualization to the faculty member in Canvas or in Learning Suite or whatever we're providing to them, the user is actually capable of finding the action. And unfortunately, a lot of the time that doesn't happen. I think we have this same kind of slip up on the teaching side. You know about teaching. Rick, you've been teaching for a big chunk of your life. So if I show you a bunch of statistics and visualizations like the ones I'm about to, of course you can intuitively understand what you need to do differently. What's the action that you need to take? And let's hop back over here and look at some of the that was a very lovely sound. Here are screenshots of some of the analytics. This is from Blackboard Learn. This is their kind of demo walkthrough of the awesome analytics they provide. So, yes, how many tests were given per course? That's something you can see. This is telling you how many logins happen on each day of the week. Off hours, evening, afternoon, morning, kind of color-coded to show you that Tuesday is the day that the most people are logging in. There's a bunch of stuff happening here. So here's some kind of, there's a goal that's been set back behind here. I'm sure you can't read this in the back, but goals that have been set for course logins, average number of pages visited, average minutes spent there, the number of courses actually using Blackboard, number of students enrolled, and you can see there's a green, yellow, red, kind of giving you some indication of whether you're hitting the goals for the average number of page views that you set for students in your class. Here's information for Mr. Blurry. I'm going to assume from that haircut it's a Mr. This is telling you how many times he's logged in, he's the blue line, how many logins did he have per month compared to the average number of logins that other people in his major had. How many interactions that'll be posted to the discussion board? How many things did he submit compared to other people in his major? Time that he spent, etc. This question at the bottom, does engagement affect grades? These are the number of course interactions at the bottom, and this is their current score in the course at the top. We would expect to see something up and to the right, like more engagement, more time on task would result in better performance. That's not quite what we're seeing in that chart there.
That chart is representing what data, Dave, from just a class? Like that's all the students in the class aggregated?
Yeah, this says it's from AMST 200, Multicultural America. So it's a single course worth of data. Average, so this is kind of GPA points at the side here. Average SIS grade points for the course divided into quartiles. So for in the Erickson School of Aging Studies, the fourth quartile was at 2.4. You get the sense for the kinds of, you see the kind of visual language that they're using. Did you hear I said language, Andy?
Say?
The visual design language that they're using?
Absolutely.
School performance, anyway, you get the idea. We come back around to the top. And that's what it looks like inside of Blackboard. Here's just a quick view of what things look like inside of Canvas. If you haven't seen the Canvas analytics before, here is grades per assignment. Each column here is an assignment. You've got a box of whiskers here telling you what the average grades are like and what the distribution of grades is like. Assignments that are on time in green, late in yellow, missing altogether in red. And again, number of page views up here. Blue are page views, oranges are page views where they took some kind of action, like they submitted something or they contributed to an online discussion, something like that. So I'd ask you again, so do we believe that these two assumptions hold in either of these cases, in the Blackboard case or in the Canvas case? So I can see the distribution of grades, I can see the average number of page views, I can see the average amount of time per page, I can see the average number of interactions. What am I supposed to do? And particularly, pretend that you're not a graduate student in instructional psychology and technology. Just pretend for a minute that you're a faculty member with a PhD in physics and you're teaching physics and you're staring at these data. What are they supposed to suggest to you? What are you supposed to do after you look through all those charts? You're supposed to get better. That's right. You're supposed to improve. Yeah.
I think it seems like a lot of those are like really good for like system level data. Like if you're an administrator, like that's going to be helpful data for you because you're trying to like just demonstrate the efficacy of your overall system.
Okay.
But in terms of how it helps an individual faculty, it's not really designed with them in mind. It's not.
So in that case, we might want to call them LMS analytics and not learning analytics. Right? Yeah. I think there's probably a distinction to be made there.
Since page is the unit of data that you're tracking, everything depends on what you mean by page and what you define as being put into a page. Otherwise, the data is pretty much meaningless.
Yeah, agreed completely. Some of you have even seen this visualization that we call the waterfall, which I spent about a year being really super enamored with. To explain it, all the labels are off of it now, but to explain it, every column is a day during the first semester at the Open High School. This is old, this is old Open High School data. Every column is a day, every row is a student, and every little droplet is a student's activity in the system on that day, and it's darker or lighter depending on how much time they spent in the system. And they're sorted from top to bottom by final grade across all their classes, average final grade across all classes, with the highest final grades at the top, lowest final grades at the bottom. So the reason we ended up calling this the waterfall is for a couple of reasons. One, you can see that there's a rock up at the top of the waterfall right where Christmas break is, and no water gets down during Christmas break. A few drops, right? And as soon as you see Christmas break, then you can see where Thanksgiving is. And as soon as you see Thanksgiving, then you can see all the weekends. Going left to right.
Labor Day.
Yeah. The other thing that makes it kind of waterfall-like is that it seems to have evaporated away by the time it gets to the bottom. There are very few drops down here, and many of them are very light. Meaning, the people who didn't come into the online environment very much and didn't spend a lot of time didn't do very well. Considering it's a completely online school, go figure. Right?
It's interesting, there's some dark people in the middle. They could be online a lot, but didn't do
Here?
super well. Yeah.
Right here?
Yeah, both of those
Yeah.
lines are kind
Both
of.
of them.
It was such a great day to do things.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to look at, I think, if you're a researcher in ed tech. I think it's fun to ponder. But again, I look at it and I say, now what am I supposed to do? How am I going to improve? Right? I assume you're all familiar with this cartoon. Does everybody know this cartoon? All right, he's doing his proof here, and step 2 is then a miracle occurs, for those of you who can't see it in the back. So I'd like you to take just a minute with folks at your table and talk about these questions. Talk about these two assumptions of, yeah, sorry, now you've got to figure it out. What could we actually provide in terms of learning analytics? If we were going to do some analysis of learning data and give something either to even say to a student or to a teacher that we've done some analysis of, hence the word analytics, learning data that we've analyzed that we're going to provide to someone, what would you want to give, or what do you think you could give, or what would you like to receive that meets those two assumptions? It's actually actionable, and that we could present in a way that the person can find the action that we intend for them to take, that they don't need a graduate degree in statistics to sort through all the data and infer what the actions ought to be based on that. So take a few minutes and talk about that, if you will.
Yeah, anyway.
So it's like really good. Getting better, studying medical data. Whenever a student or a teacher, here are the grades of the that's what the correct thing is. Starting to get you know, when you get your medical well, the lab reports are good because it always gives, you get your report, but it always says what you're reading. That's where you if you're not outside, but so you have a sense of like the red, yellow, green. But a lab report doesn't do now what it does.
So let's say you were like and give your patient I'd like to now be like
you have to know what the range of what kind of outcomes the reason they want to learn muscle because it's a theory. I mean, it's a theory. It's not necessarily empirical. It's a theory. Cholesterol is so it's linked to a certain outcome. You could have certain like behavior statistics and learning analytics that would say
Well, and I think there's different levels of like teacher and student. So even the teacher, I mean, you kind of look at like the data as the lab report with scribbling without like any explanation. And it's making that sense of the doctor that's memorized all these things, they know exactly where the like signs are. But in reality, the situation is learning those things. So you have to have so how often this teacher with a little parents like this this is the type of student like this
it's the same kind of assumption. It's like there's two different types of data. Is it better to circumvent your doctor and get it right to the patients, or yes.
And some doctors have problems with like because they want to be an expert, they want to be what should I when it comes to real, but if I could PowerPoint, there's certain standards and take responsibility for that. Now I'm not having to go.
Yeah, maybe like you're saying, you just highlight what's like, there's a series of problems.
They already know and then they think
Yeah, just like, and everything. They actually,
I think because if I sit in a classroom, the teacher spews forth the information, and then like I take a test or whatever, I don't have that feedback. I don't have any data coming my way other than my own lens of like self-awareness and whether or not I understand that. But so I think the heart of it is how you do it. So you have to make sure you're doing good data. Because once you have the data, it's just
student learning and engagement is going to be inadequate, because what you really don't see is your textbook page.
yeah, and even like,
We're assuming.
Okay, let's have some report back.
I mean, that's what the one chart showed.
I think my presentation was complex. Okay. Somebody willing to share the core or the crux of the conversation in your group? Not all at once. Rob?
Bob.
Bob?
Well, one thing that our research has been looking at is using analytics to identify common errors that students are making. So, like if a lot of students are really struggling with a particular concept, then we can deliver that to the instructors so that they can address that. Good. Bob mentioned something else too.
We also talked about the ability of the system to flag students based on certain criteria, maybe comparing them to how students did on the assignment in a previous semester or a previous year. Say, like the average student spent a couple hours online and you were significantly below or above, and those students would be flagged so the instructor would know who to target with their interventions.
Okay.
We talked a little bit in our group, more on the student side, how analytics would help the student see benefits. So especially on an online environment where they may not be going necessarily from class period to class period or something, how to use analytics in previous class periods or things like that to understand maybe the amount of time that they were using in relation to assignments, so that they can either make a better or more effective plan, or even learn about some of their study habits or styles that might be less effective.
Great. How about somebody in the back?
Well, we talked about presenting data is helpful, the way the medical profession has started doing that. When you get like your cholesterol numbers, they don't mean anything in the abstract until you know what's normal and what's you should worry about, and same thing with weight. And so to provide numbers within a context, and just like there's no cholesterol. The theory is that it's linked to heart disease later on, and so you have to go those correlations, but provide numbers within a context that says you're a little bit worried, now you're obese, you're really worried, and then also some sort of actionable things about what to do about it.
Great. Anybody else?
Jim, we talked a little bit about Amazon and how when you go to Amazon, they will give you recommendations on where where other people like you who've read this book give you recommendations on where you could go and kind of tie that to student interactions, and how we could say, well, students who were in your situation or who succeeded in this class or this particular area spent time on these pages, these areas. Same kind of thing.
I do like ideas like that as long as they stay recommendations. And the system doesn't start automatically shuttling me through. Like imagine if Amazon just shipped you something every week. There's other people who bought the stuff you bought in the past like this, so here you go. Right? I think there's, and it's kind of a joke, right? But there's a really important role for recommendations, and there's a place where recommendations cross the line, too, right? So how many of you use Google? Every person in this room, raise your hand, or you're not listening. How many of you ever clicked the I'm feeling lucky button?
Did we do that in like 1999?
2001. Yeah. Why don't you click the I'm feeling lucky button? You trust Google to be the best place to search. Why not just take the one result that it knows is the best result for you?
I don't know if my keyword was the best one. I just think that
Right. So there's some level of discomfort about fully automating the process. Right? We want to automate 95% of the process, and then we still want to get to the side. I don't want to go and have to crawl the whole web myself and look around. I want some support in that process, but I actually want to choose at the end of it. So John Henry kind of something there.
You and I have talked about this before, but
You speak up, please.
I think that besides giving these analytics to the students, I think especially if there's, if there's a blended type approach to the instruction, how important is it, or how cool would it be for the instructors to have ahead of time, this is the group of people you have in your class. We can divide them up this way. It's been shown that these types of students have problems here, these types of students have problems here, so you can know in advance, oh, maybe I need to spend more time on this section and less time on this section, or maybe I need to make sure they know that they're on top of this right here, just depending upon the makeup of your class. So, that's another area where analytics can really help.
Yeah. Although again, if you fully automate that, it starts to get a minority report kind of
Not
feel to
fully
it.
automated.
Yeah. Or, yes, thank you. Let me talk through a set of kind of painful lessons that we learned on a recent project with VCCS, which is the Virginia Community College System. 23 schools, obviously in Virginia. That wanted some help using analytics data to figure out, to this point that Rob was making earlier, like where are students struggling the most and what can we do, to help them? If we can find the places where students are having the hardest time. Now, I'm not going to go through what this means or what it actually says for those of you in the back, because I'm showing this as a bad example. So, the first thing we did was we went through their Canvas and their Blackboard, depending on which school it was, and pulled out a bunch of data, looking at all their assignments and how much time people spent on the pages that were associated with those assignments, and did a difficulty estimation for each of the assignments, and percent that submitted and were late, and the average score they received, and a bunch of stuff, and tried to eyeball that and figure out what it meant. Well, actually, first, we showed it to faculty who threw up all over it. And then we looked at it and tried to figure out what it meant. And then we started doing some little plots of, if you believe that, the time on task kind of hypothesis, that more people engaging, or more time spent, more engagement in the system should time spent and engagement ought to correlate with performance. We started looking at some plots of that. So here's a case where we've got a little cluster of 5 people who spent almost no time, but still did really well on the assignment. So maybe that plot is interesting. Maybe there's something going on with the ethical dilemma case. Or this second exam almost looks too neat in some ways, with the number of people that are actually on the line and the distribution out from the line. Here again, well, anyway, you can eyeball these and try to figure out what's going on. We showed these to faculty and tried to give them some strategies for how to look at them and interpret them. And again, they were like, I have no idea what you're talking about, Dave. That's great. What we ended up providing back to them as a quote-unquote visualization was this. Right, so we went through that data. We used those data to say, what were the most effective units? What were the units in the course where students did really well, they engaged with the content, they performed well on the outcomes? What are the places where there was improvement? You know, does the World Bank have an ATM? That unit needs some improvement, right? So why does it need, not just identifying it, but then going through and saying, like, here's the specific issue. We've had instructional designers go through and review either the assignment and or the content. Here's what we think the problem might be, and here are some potential improvements. Like if you've got 30 minutes between now and the next time you teach the course, here's some things that you might do. This is not fully automatable, right? The part where you identify these three things is fairly automatable, but then getting from there to actually knowing what a person needs to do takes human intervention, and it took several cycles of frustration working through this process to finally arrive at something that you could hand to a faculty member, a normal faculty member, that they can make some kind of use of. Charles.
So the top part where you identified the actual problems, did you have visualizations that helped you identify what
We did internally, yeah.
Okay.
But as we showed those visualizations to faculty and tried to talk them through how to think about them and how to develop an intuition around what ought to be happening where, it just turned into a class, right, on everything basic learning theory, basic statistics, whatever. And it turned out that it was just too much to try to communicate to them. They were great at business, terrific on the business side, but as soon as we got into the, oh look, they're spending, like, you start talking about time on task, and you think, well, then the more time, the better. So, well, actually, if they spend 30 hours on one unit, it's actually probably problematic. You know, just the engagement metrics are probably an upside down U. And anyway, it just got so convoluted that we just pulled it all back in. And said, we can automate the identification, and then we can do a little analysis to say, here's probably what's going on, and hand that to a faculty member. And then it's actually actionable for them.
Did you have visualizations that allowed the more, you know, the teaching and learning expert or whatever to more quickly get at what are
so like those ones I was showing you were some of the ones that we did. Those are some of the ones that we used internally.
Okay.
So that's one example of, this is when I really started becoming a bit contrarian about the idea of analytics, because no matter how we visualized it, no matter what we showed to them, our goal was to provide them with a way to make their courses better. And there was no end product in terms of a visualization or a set of statistics or a table that we could give them that made it clear to them what they needed to do next, because they're not instructional designers. Pivot for a minute to telling stories with data in terms of visualization. So this was published in EDUCAUSE Review a year and a half or so ago. It's a story about Mercy College in New York, which is a smaller kind of open access college, and their Math 116, which is a, Math 116 is the college algebra course. So here's one way of presenting the data. This is part of, up to spring 2013, these are the data that were presented in the paper. Right, so there was a time when this course was offered in a very traditional format with a traditional textbook. And this is getting into the OER work now. For those of you that know me, you won't be surprised that it's bled over into that now. But at some point in spring of 2012, they said, instead of assigning this $180 bundle of a textbook and an online math practice system where you go on and it generates problems and you do them, let's switch over and let's use an open textbook instead, and let's use an open source system that generates problems and feedback and things like that. So instead of $180 per student spend, now it's a $5 spend for some hosting and backup and support and things like that. So they moved from not using any OER at all to using OER in a couple of sections. And that pilot went well enough that they flipped over to using OER in all the sections of 116. And you see kind of a spring-fall kind of seasonal effect here where students enroll in fall, some of them pass and they go on. The ones that fail in fall come back in spring. Because this is the one math class they have to pass in order to graduate. So spring is always pulled down a little further from fall. You can see that sort of seasonal effect through there. But what this doesn't make clear at all is that spring to spring, in spring 11, the pass rate was under 50%. And it had been right around 48 or 50 for several years up to here. And 3 years later, the spring pass rate's over 77% now. That's a pretty interesting story, but it doesn't come out in those data. This is the way that it was visualized in the article with these two little bar charts, showing here's what it was before we started using OER, and here's what it was after. And we're actually presenting this again next week at ELI with these new data. Now the pass rate is 77%. But in some ways, the story that's interesting here is the combination of the pass rates plus the cost data. Because of this up and to the right phenomenon, that you're supposed to get what you pay for, right? If you buy more expensive speakers, you're supposed to get better quality speakers, or a more expensive car is a better car, or when you pay more for something, you typically expect it to be better quality than the cheap version of the thing. So we started playing around with this in terms of a really simple visualization that looks like this. So 4 quadrants. Here's our up and to the, these two up and to the right. If I don't pay very much for my materials, but I don't have a large percentage of students completing with a C or better, that's sad, but probably expected. And if I charge a lot, but a lot of them do really well, then that makes me happy. But then there's this either up and to the left or down and to the right, depending on how you look at it. But if I spend a lot, but my kids still aren't learning much, that makes me angry. But if I could spend a little and have kids learning a lot, then that's really great. And for this set of data here, you've got, right, so it's Pearson's My Math Lab, and the textbook that's bundled with that. Math. It's math. It's 170, I can't remember exactly how many, $170 spend, and 48% of students are completing with a C or better, versus a $5 spend when 77% of students are completing with a C or better. And if you just take the numbers or the table and talk about them, it doesn't quite tell the same story that you can tell visually. Here's the same type of data for 16 courses. This is from a study that we're just writing up this version of it now. The first analysis has already been submitted for publication, but this kind of 4-quadrant analysis we're just doing now. This is across 8 schools. There were 10,000 students using traditional textbooks and 5,000 students using open textbooks across courses with 50 different numbers, but they're all essentially kind of the same 10 or 12 intro to psych, intro to bio, intro to sociology kinds of classes. And the students who were using OER were using it in a way where there was a $5 support fee attached to the course, as opposed to whatever it was that they were paying for textbooks in the previous model. Right, so the average pass rate down here is 74%, and the average pass rate up here is 71%. And when you plot the kind of best fitting line here, it's a down and to the right sort of line, which is not the line that we would expect, which is the up and to the right kind of line. So I think in some ways, I think the data visualizations that are the most interesting are the ones that kind of challenge your intuitions. Right? You say, oh, I would expect if I was asking students to spend more and more and more that we'd get more and more learning out of that. But the last thing I want to show is just some interactive visualization. And this is going back through and having taken some learning data and then wrapped that data up in an interactive format. Right? So this is about impacts at an institution for choosing OER instead of a commercial textbook. And there's a bunch of parameters I can set about the institutional context. What's the average textbook cost that I'm replacing with OER? How many students are using OER? OER, Open Educational Resources. What's the support fee that I'm levying on those classes? What percentage of these students were paying in-state tuition, and how much per credit hour does it cost for in-state and out-of-state? What percentage of students historically were receiving a better and C or better, and how many of them were dropping? And then some parameters that are defaulted based out of the research that John Hilton and Lane Fisher and I have been doing for the last couple of years. What percentage increase in C or better rate are you expecting to see among OER users? And across a number of studies, it looks like that's about 3%. A 1% decrease in drop rate and about 1 additional credit taken per term by community college students who save money by not buying a textbook, reinvesting that in taking another class. And so, we can play with these parameters. Where'd my mouse go? There we go. So you can start to play with these around how much the textbook costs, and then you can see the chart over here around the total amount of textbook cost to students, or if I start messing with the number of students that are doing it, then of course that changes it as well. I can start playing with the percentage of students that traditionally received a C or better, and how many of those drop. What's the difference between the percentage of students that are going to earn a C or better that hadn't before. So all this learning data has been taken and wrapped up now in a visualization that is not exactly the kind we were talking about before, but it's an analysis of learning data visualized in a way that actually would let you make some decisions, like if at a campus, if a president comes out and says, I want to save students $100,000 next year, then there are a bunch of different ways that you could plan to do that. And you can turn these knobs until you find a model that looks like it'll work for you, and then you could go and do that. Right, so, again, learning data out of the SIS mostly, not out of the LMS in this case, but visualized in a way that you can actually interact with it and watch the effects of what happens as you tune parameters in the model. So that's about time, but there is still several minutes we can talk more. So, thoughts about visualization? Interactive visualization versus static, predictive, how it's used?
I've heard the term that a lot of the analytics and data that goes into analytics is kind of referred to as exhaust data, right? This is data that comes out after the class is over, or this is after instruction's been given, and the data just comes out of these systems and they collect it and they put it into some visualization. Do you have any thoughts into the front end of some of these, any exposure, visibility that you have into, are there new measurements or new ways of measuring learning that's being put into analytics or visualization at this point?
Well, the idea of data exhaust is that it's just the byproduct, it's a natural byproduct of whatever you're already doing, right? So if I'm giving my class online, students are going online, they're logging in, they're doing, and as they're learning, they're not engaging in any research tasks, they're just doing the stuff they would normally do, and that natural activity is throwing off some data as a byproduct. What page did they look at, how long were they there, things like that. But I think what you're asking, I think the answer to the question you're asking is that there's only so much you can do with that kind of exhaust data to answer more interesting questions. You have to think what the questions are ahead of time and instrument specifically to collect those data. And sometimes it means asking students to do something slightly different, but sometimes it just means capturing data that the system isn't already capturing that it might or maybe should have been captured in the first place. But it's just like any other piece of research, right? What is it that you want to get out of it? What's the end goal? What kind of data would you need to analyze to be able to answer that? And how do you line that up to? What's the question? What kind of data do you need to answer it? How do you need to analyze it to answer it? And that data capture part of it, you can almost never do interestingly just with exhaust. You're going to need to instrument some additional data for it if you want to do something really interesting. I think, although I'd be happy to contradict it. Because if we could do something really interesting with just the exhaust, then we could do it at a lot larger scale than the type of scale you can do. And to answer this specific question, everybody has to leave your LMS and use this certain system because it's the only one instrumented to generate the data that we need to answer our question. To Rob's earlier point, about, or maybe that was when I was at the table, he was talking about the intelligent tutoring systems at Carnegie Mellon. They generate really interesting data. You can ask really interesting questions of those data, but you can never do those types of analyses over exhaust. Not the kind you get out of an LMS.
Let's give Dave a big hand. Soup Kitchen. So we'll meet downstairs for Soup Kitchen, and you can ask Dave additional questions down there. And thanks for your insights.
The food's already blessed.
Yes.